I treated my company like a startup. I didn't worry about how much money I was making, right? I think my salary for the first year, I set to I think maybe $45,000.
Hello. Welcome to today's session of Selling the Couch. I hope you're doing well, having an incredible day. So today's podcast session is actually a topic that, from my memory, I don't actually think we've ever done an episode on, which is this transition of a solo practitioner to a private pay group practice. Some of the things that you have to think about and navigate. I'm joined by Dr. Adam Assoian from Ally Psych in Doylestown, Pennsylvania. Doylestown is a suburb here of Philly, and Adam and I actually connected through our mutual friend Anna O'Brien. And Adam, a couple of months ago, did a private practice building workshop that I had the incredible honor to be a part of. And one of the things that I just really struck me about Adam was just how open and honest he was. So Adam's practice, as we record this, is 5 years old. He currently employs 8+ clinicians, and it's a full private pay group practice. And as Adam will share, as you'll hear in this interview, the summer actually ended up being their busiest month ever. You know, often the impression or the common kind of thing is typically private practices take a dip, especially in the summers. And so Adam is here just to kind of share the raw and the real of what it takes to build a private pay group practice. We're covering a number of different topics. The first area that we get into is Adam's transition from a solo practitioner that was private pay to going to group practice, and how come he didn't go the insurance route? I mean, that's often seen as kind of the safer route, especially if you knew that, or if you know that you're going to eventually enter into a group practice. We also cover some things about finding office space. I think some of the tips that Adam shares is a little bit atypical, but incredibly wise in terms of how to find office space and why it actually makes sense to rent or even have more office space than you currently have the need for. And we wrap up in a bunch of different ways. Where do they get their clients from? What does marketing look like? Why does the presence of what your actual office space, why that can often be some of the best marketing out there? And then really in terms of payment, because they have a range of clinicians, both doctoral level as well as master's level, what does that look like in terms of payment? Just on the low end, Adam's practice as of this recording, master's levels clinicians charge $165 an hour, doctoral levels charge around the $200 an hour mark. And so what does all of that look like? And then the final question is this question that has been on my mind. I know it's one on a lot of our minds, which is in uncertain economies like this, where you have things like a election, you have inflation, you have rising home prices, all of these different things. How in the world do you sustain and consistently sustain a private pay group practice? I think you're going to really enjoy this conversation. Here's my conversation with Adam Assoian from allypsych.com. Hey Adam, welcome to Selling the Couch.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
My goodness. First of all, so random, right? Shout out to our mutual friend Anna for hosting a meetup gathering of therapists at her.
Absolutely. Yeah, that was great. Yeah.
Adam led a workshop on private practice building, and you probably remember this. I embarrassingly don't remember this. You had sent an email a couple of years ago asking to come on the podcast, and I totally did not respond to you. So I am so sorry.
So I don't remember specifically. Yeah. However, that a couple of years ago, I was making a really big push to get on therapy related podcasts. So if it makes you feel better, I reached out to a bunch and no one got back to me. So,
Oh man. Okay.
it's all good.
Yeah. Maybe
How'd you figure that out?
I randomly just Googled, like, looked in my inbox, and I was like, oh, they emailed back in 2022, and I didn't respond. So, but you know what? Maybe we weren't ready for it.
We weren't, the practice has grown a lot since 2022. So this is probably a better time than back then anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. I know. I feel like we really connected on that initial call. We've had at least, I think, 2 calls since then, and now we try to really catch up and be intentional because we just, I think, connected on multiple levels.
Absolutely.
I'm really excited for our conversation today because it's actually not a topic we've had that I remember, which is tips on starting a private pay group practice. So this is, I think many times when we think of this transition from going from solo to group, I think the assumption is usually I got to take insurance, and
Sure.
you've actually done the opposite. So even before we jump too much into the questions, can you give us an idea of Ally, like where you guys are at in terms of both number of clinicians and number of staff and all of that kind of stuff?
Yeah. So to answer that, just a super quick overview. I started it in August of 2019. So we just hit our 5-year mark. When I started, it was just me.
Wow.
I had
and
7
this
clients.
was just before the pandemic then.
Yeah. It was interesting timing. It was just me. I had 7 clients that followed me from a part-time private practice gig I had working on the side. And now, 5 years later, there are, including myself, 8 full-time providers, 7 of which are therapists. 1 is a psychiatric mental health nurse practitioner for med management. I have a full-time practice coordinator who takes care of like the day-to-day scheduling, intake calls, all of that. And then I have a neuropsychologist I contract with to do all of our evaluations. So across the span, I oversee 9 other people. On an average week, we see probably around like 225 appointments. And that's ramping up to probably get closer to like 250 a week.
And this is across therapy and med management, like both of
those? That's across therapy, med management. Evaluations is a very small part of what we do, but includes them as well. It's a massive number of people we're able to serve in the community. And to your point, I mean, it's from pretty much the beginning, there's a little exception, but by and large, it's 100% or has always been 100% private pay. And it's been that way since the inception of it.
Amazing. I mean, it's amazing to build that in a span of 5 years. It's also amazing to build it in the midst of like a pandemic, because like 5 of those years, right? Like really probably 2.5 of that was pandemic, post-pandemic.
It was a lot to navigate. Honestly, the pandemic helped accelerate. It had its own set of challenges, and I've definitely shaved a couple of years off my life with all the stress of building the practice. But other than that, I mean, it's been great, and I can't imagine doing it any other way.
As I shared earlier, I think a lot of times when clinicians think about going from solo to group, their default is insurance. What did you learn in your journey prior to starting your group practice that made you say, okay, I'm going to go the private pay route versus like the default insurance route?
Right. Yeah. So honestly, the biggest thing was necessity. So when I started out, I was doing my initial research on, private pay, insurance, whatever it might be. Insurance contractually has 45 up to 45 days to process your claim. And that's if you processed it or you submitted it correctly. Incorrect could mean a comma is out of place in your address, or it just doesn't register correctly. And then they kick it back. You have to resubmit. Now it's another 45 days for them to process it. When I was starting the company, I couldn't wait 45 plus days to get paid. I was a young business. It's not like I had this huge bankroll just waiting to fund me, right? I didn't have venture capitalists or investors or anything like that. It was me. So it was a big part of it born out of necessity. I needed to get paid to keep the lights on, to keep doing what I was doing. The other part of it is just the really shitty reality that insurance doesn't pay anything close to what is really like a livable wage. When you compare medical insurance reimbursement to psychological, which is this weird mix of is it medical, isn't it medical? I mean, there's no comparison. Insurance companies pay out for a full hour, right? A 50, 55-minute session, $180, not even. That's like the top tier. Most pay $130, $150, and that's for a psychologist. So I knew going into opening a private practice, one of the things I had to consider was the type of life I wanted to live. And I knew I wanted to have it be a group practice sooner than later. So what type of life did I want my employees to have? And that's one that honored a work-life balance, right? So I knew if I took insurance, myself and the therapists that work for me would have to see a massive amount of people every week to get paid a livable wage. And that's what leads to burnout. And if you have therapists that are burnt out because they have to see 50 plus people a week, they're not going to offer the highest level of care that they could or should be. They're not able to reach out to or respond to their clients or patients in between appointments if there's something going on. So yes, it's because I needed to get paid quicker, right? Cash in hand. Yes, it is because I thought I should earn a livable wage without having to work 40, 50 clinical hours a week on top of all the admin. But it's also very much about the quality of care that I needed to be able to offer, because I started Ally Psych because I wasn't happy how other practices were doing it. And it needed to be done different. The community deserved something different.
I think it requires an incredible amount of wisdom and knowledge, not just to think about like yourself as a business owner and what you needed, but also to think about your future employees and how do I build a practice that's not just like conducive to the lifestyle I want, but also that takes care of themselves. And I could imagine, right? Like at a practical level, when you build it in that way, and I don't even know if like I would even thought something like that. I don't think I would have, but like I would imagine retain those clinicians because they're not
Yep.
like teetering on the edge of burnout and
Right.
seeing,
And that's the other thing, right? I mean, our field in private practice has such a high turnover rate. And it's a terrible thing to invest in someone, in an employee, right? A therapist that works at the practice, for them to be dissatisfied and to go somewhere else. The ethos of the practice has always been patients before profit, right? Or people before profit. And part of that, when you really boil it down, is it's not just the clients that are the people, it's the employees. that are the people as well. So if you prioritize your people, the people that work for you, before you're prioritizing the bottom line, it pays dividends, and that's how you grow a successful practice. That pays for itself, and you're going to thrive. So that's always been what underscores all of the decisions I make, always putting the people, whether they're employees or the clients, before the profit. And that goes down to the very first office I got. Again, I knew I wanted it to be a group. So it would have been a more financially sound decision to go, all right, I'm just going to rent a single office out for a couple $100 a month. Easy, right? But I was thinking, like, well, if I want to be a group, that means I'm going to have to move out of that office space when I want to expand. And then what if clients choose me in part because of my location? And what if I move 10 minutes down the road in the opposite direction for them? And they're already driving 20, 30 minutes. Maybe they wouldn't have stuck with me or chosen me if it was 30 or 40 minutes. Why is that fair to the client that I'm choosing to move, and now they're the ones that have to deal with the consequences of that? So from the beginning, I chose an office space that was intentionally too large for just me. It had its own waiting room, had 3 therapy offices in it, knowing I was going to grow into the space instead of out of the space. I ended up growing out of the space 2 times over, but either way. So starting for the first 3 years, that's what we did. We just lived in that space and expanded next door. And when I needed to expand again, the same mentality. It's not fair to the client that I'm choosing to grow. They didn't have that choice. So I only considered offices that were in the same complex I was already in, or literally across the street. So it wouldn't make any difference to the clients if I did move.
Is that like generally a good strategy, like in terms of office location, trying to find a space where there are other offices in
If
that
you want
area?
to, yeah, I think so. I mean, if you want to expand your practice, right? If you start out solo, which most people do, unless you go in with like a partner. But if you start out solo, it gives you the option to expand if you want to. Now, there are some sticking points to that, right? Like, you don't know if an office is going to become available. If one does, is it going to be near your current office? What's it going to look like? Is it the right size? Is it too big? Is it too small? All these different things. But it does offer the most flexibility or the potential. So if we talk about like opportunity cost, it probably makes the most sense that way.
Yeah, I like that. You said you initially had an office space that was way more than you needed, and you were like a new practice. Like, that's a dumb question. How in the world did you pay for it? Like,
Well, so again, being private pay.
yeah,
So a lot of this, I mean, it's all relative, but I live in an area that is affluent, that can afford private pay, which is another consideration for starting a practice, right? Like, do you live in a space that can sustain a private pay practice? I mean, the answer is always yes. It just depends on how much you want to charge, right? So, but rent, I think I was paying $1,700 a month when I first started for the office space. Okay, so it's simple math, right? I charge $200 an hour. How many clients do I need to see a month just to cover rent or what my overhead was? And when it's a solo practice in the beginning, overhead is nothing, right? All in month to month, I was at most like $2,500. Okay, so charging $200 an hour, if that's my monthly, then
yeah,
I'm good.
yeah. right. You see
right?
12 clients in a week and
Right.
you could hit that. Yeah.
Easy. Right. So I knew I just had to get to that number, right? Like, this is the number I need to just sustain for now. And then the rest, profit.
I remember when you did that workshop, one of the things I most appreciated was you were so open and like vulnerable with like even numbers and sharing. And I think you said in the earlier days, like you had to like disproportionately kind of reinvest it back into the business, right? Can
Oh,
you
yeah.
tell a little bit more about that? Because I feel like we don't talk about this enough, right? Because we focus so much on revenue
Yeah.
but we don't actually talk about like how much people bring in and then also the reality. I feel like,
Yeah.
I don't know,
So,
maybe I was just
no,
gonna
for the
say like maybe,
first,
well, I was just gonna say like maybe I'm a little naive on this, but like I think this is true. Like businesses go through seasons where you like disproportionately reinvest, and then also when businesses start, you have to disproportionately like invest into the business.
yeah. I mean, I joke around with people I'm close to. I treated my company like a startup where I didn't worry about how much money I was making, right? I think my salary for the first year, I set to like, I think maybe $45,000. And yeah, I mean, if I needed more money, I took it out of the company, but my priority was building up the company bank account for the rainy day. And I needed it, right? Those rainy days happen. But then it also comes down to strategy. If you're a solo practitioner, you don't need a lot, right? Again, minimal overhead. Now, if you want to talk about scaling, my overhead back then, let's call it $2,500 a month. Now my overhead is probably close to, I don't know, 15,000, 17,000 a month, all in. It's a shit ton of money that goes out the door just to keep everything operating. But, of course, there are ways I could cut back, right? I don't have to offer snacks in the waiting room. I don't have to offer 3 different types of coffees or 2 different types of tea and all of the different sugar packets or whatever, right? But that's what people deserve. If they're paying good, hard-earned money to come talk to us for an hour, they deserve to have a comfortable experience. I got tired of walking into therapy offices that looked dingy as fuck or had holes in the walls or like shitty artwork hanging that, cost $5. But I was shelling out, $200 an hour to go talk to someone. And I'm not saying that the aesthetic of the office makes the therapist or not, right? Like I can do what I do sitting on the ground anywhere. But the comfort of the client is what matters. Again, people before profit. Why, if offering Keurig coffees or juice boxes or water bottles is going to make or break my company, I'm clearly doing something wrong.
Right. I think it can be so easy to like focus just on that profit, and then like lose touch with that experience part of it.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think that's where you get people going to therapy and saying like, yeah, like it was all right, but like, I don't know, I didn't feel like comfortable there. Like my therapist was fine, but like it just something felt off. People walk into the office and they always come like, oh my God, this is beautiful. It's because I give a fuck about comfortable chairs, and it doesn't feel like you're walking into a physician's office, right? We all know when you go into like a doctor's office, it's like the chairs that are kind of attached together, or it's like the weird pattern chair that hides stains, and it's just like sterile. And they don't, because there's just high turnover there. No, like come in. I have clients that come in half an hour early just to sit in the waiting room and sip a coffee before their appointment. because they just feel comfortable in the space.
Yeah. It's not just about the 1 hour they see for therapy, but it's about that whole experience as they
Yeah,
enter the parking lot, get
right.
in.
And that's, what they remember. Yeah, the therapy, but when they go and they have a friend that asks like, hey, where do you go for therapy? Or like, do you know anyone? They go, yeah, go to this. Like, they take care of you. It's super comfy. It's a really nice place, especially again, being private pay. If I'm asking people to shell out, 165 for a master's level clinician or 200 for a doctor, like, you deserve to be in a nice place, and you deserve to have coffee and snacks and to feel like, all right, this is somewhere I'm comfy, because that's what people expect. You don't walk into a Porsche or BMW or Lexus dealership and it's like dingy. It feels elevated because you're paying a shit ton of money for a car.
This is a really random question. Uh, to get that vibe, like furniture and
Mhm.
stuff, like are there like places that you love to shop?
Honestly, a lot of the furniture, uh, all the therapists decorate their own office. Like, I give them a stipend when I hire them because I want it to feel like theirs and to represent them. But a lot of them order from like a place called Article. Um, Honestly, IKEA is not half bad at all. Like, my couch and chair and all that stuff is from the company. I think it's Article or one of the online things. But
Yeah.
wherever it doesn't, it's a couch, but you can go really cheap and people go like, yeah, it's fine. Or they can walk in and go like, oh shit, this is a really nice office.
Yeah.
And
There's
it doesn't
something.
have to, right? It doesn't have to break the bank. It just has to look good and be comfortable. There's a big difference between a $400 couch and a $700 couch. They're just like, it just jumps in quality.
You started to speak about this. You said master's level clinicians are around like 165, doctoral level is like 200. How do
Yeah.
you think about like the pricing for clinicians? Like, is it
Yeah.
based on
So
degree, is experience? Like, is it what?
in part, it's mostly degree, right? There are a lot of practices that I've seen that go like, oh, they have this many years of experience, so it's like this much money or whatever. Like, what I think happens there is you get people who can't afford the correct therapist for them. So they have to go with a cheaper, less experienced therapist, even if they don't have the right specialty. And that's just kind of like a crapshoot, right? It can go the other way as well. But at Ally, master's level clinicians are 165. Doesn't matter which one you choose. If they have their doctorate, it's 200. And then we have a couple therapists that have specialties. Like, we do a lot of EMDR. So EMDR trained therapists, those sessions, EMDR sessions, are 200, right? We do ketamine assisted psychotherapy. Those are 250 because those are all highly specialized, where they had to spend a lot of time, a lot of money getting trained in those modalities. But what that allows us to do when all the clinicians at a degree level are the same price, one, clients don't have to worry about if they can afford the right therapist, if they can afford coming to the practice, which not everyone can. But then we get to worry about pairing them with the right therapist, irregardless of the financial aspect of it. And that's what it's about, right? There are so many practices or clinicians like, I just need to fill my caseload, and they accept every single client that calls them, even if they shouldn't, if they don't have the training or the experience to help them. And I get it, it's money in, right? But I rather send or refer someone out than put them with the wrong therapist. I might have a therapist that has an opening, but If they're not the right therapist for what that client is calling for, nope, sorry. I'm not going to taint your therapeutic experience because I need you to fill that seat that badly. And that's, again, people before profit. If I only cared about the profit, I'd be like, yeah, I don't give a fuck. Come in, I'll get a session or two out of you. And then if you hate it and you don't come back, I'll just do it again. Fuck that. Because now I just tainted their therapy experience for maybe ever. And I refuse to do that.
How do you hold that tension in your mind of like, let's say, practical situation, right? Like you've onboarded a clinician, they need to get new clients, right? You've got calls coming and you're realizing, okay, like call after call, this is not probably the best fit. How do you hold that tension in your head of like letting them go versus like realizing, oh crap, like I gotta fill the slot, these slots?
Right. Honestly, it is the thing that keeps me up at night. Owning it's the biggest stressor, and all my employees will tell you that that is the thing I stress about, filling their caseloads, because it's their paychecks. They trust me to get them clients to earn money that they need. And this is where I think a lot of practice owners struggle, and it's the business side of it. It's the marketing side of it, right? So if I hire someone, one, I'm only hiring someone if I have a steady flow of clients to give them, and all my other therapists are already full. Because I don't want to hire someone when someone else that has seniority still needs clients. That's not fair. And that also doesn't help with like the culture of the place. So that's the first thing. The second thing is I learned how to market. So I know if I hire this therapist and they like this type of client, or this is their niche, or this whatever, I pivot my marketing to get those types of clients. And when I onboard someone, I ramp up my advertising and my marketing to make sure I get them full.
What does like the marketing look like, especially like during ramp ups? Is it a certain platform? Is it kind of diversified? Is it
Diversified for sure. I mean, I use Google Ads. That's where I would say like a fair amount of our referrals come from at this point. I spend a decent chunk of change on that every month. But other than that, it's organic. Again, 200 some odd people a week. It's a lot of friends and family that refer, right? And again, it's a nice place. They have a good experience. So they want to refer their people here. It's a lot of just networking with other therapists for services that we don't offer. We can refer to them and vice versa. And a lot of clinicians, a lot of owners view other practice owners as competition. So they'll never network or they'll never refer to someone else. I'm like, how? Like, one, there's so many clients out there for everyone. But also, like, you can't see all of the people. You're not the right therapist for everyone that calls you. Why wouldn't you want to grow your network and be able to direct them to the right therapist? Just makes sense. So we get a lot of referrals, and I'll reach out to my network and be like, hey, just hired a new therapist. This is what they do. If you have anyone that would be appropriate, we have openings.
You'll just email them, or how do you?
No, I do a video call.
Okay.
Again, like personal.
Nice.
Like I set up a time.
Zoom call.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or like I'll go buy them a coffee. Like, hey, let's go meet up. Let's catch up. I want to update you about my practice. And it's just building a relationship. It doesn't have to be transactional, right? Like, I genuinely want to help other practice owners by filling them. Like, we get more referrals than we can handle. So why am I just going to tell the person that calls looking for therapy, like, hey, sorry, we can't help you, bye, good luck? No, like, spend the extra 5 minutes, learn where, like, what their concerns are, and then direct them where they can go.
Yeah, I feel like, fundamentally therapists are relational. And then I think once we put on sort of the private practice hat, I think we feel this sort of like pressure of like whether it's like there's only a finite amount of clients or let me just do like kind of the
Right.
bare minimum. But
Yeah.
I think like this approach is the better one because if you can sort of lean into, I mean, these networking relationships, I feel like it's very similar to a therapeutic relationship, right? Like they just take time to build, right? You're
Yeah.
not throwing like a crazy intervention like in the first 3 months
Right.
of meeting somebody.
Yeah. And I may never get a referral from someone, and that's okay. It's just about being a fucking person, and private practice can be isolating, especially when you're just starting out and you're solo. So having that connection, having that network, I used to set time aside just to connect with people so I didn't feel so alone.
Yeah. Man, our time is flying. We may have to do a second part on this one.
Yeah, we could absolutely do that.
But let me we'll probably go for about 5 more minutes. But what's a common mistake that you see therapists making in either in group practice or transitioning to a group practice when it comes to setting up a private pay practice?
Honestly, part of it is they don't charge enough.
Mhm.
And like it's a very delicate balance, right? I don't think people should be out there. Like, you have to know your market. You have to know where you live, right? If I lived in Manhattan, I could charge $400 an hour. That's market rate in Manhattan. In Doylestown, where I live, for a psychologist, market rate is about 200, right? And there are some that are a little bit more, and there are some that are a little bit less. But what happens is you have clients that typically shop around, as they do. And I see a lot of clinicians starting out, usually master's level, and 'cause that's just the majority of them in the field, and they're charging like 100 or 125. And I ask them, like, why are you charging that? Like, look at your peers. They're at 150, 165, 175. I know master's level, they're charging 185, and I think that's pushing it. But nevertheless, like, well, I want to be accessible and I want to fill my case. So I'm like, double-edged sword. You are more accessible, but you're going to get clients that can afford more, and then look at your pricing and like, why are they so cheap? Are they not experienced? So there's a psychology to pricing things, right? When I first started out, I will never forget the first intake call I did. So it was the first time I was like 200 a session, and they were like, okay. I was like, okay, thanks. And I said it more confident than that, but internally I was just like, all right, like, do or die. You just have to, you go with it, right? If I said 100, I would have people say like, why? Like,
What's the catch?
right. And there are a lot of psychological experiments. They do it in art museums where they put something on display and they put, $100 as the price tag. No one wants it. Same exact art display, but they charge $10,000 for it, and people buy it. People have a perception of that they associate with cost, right? Cost to a lot of people is correlated with value. It doesn't mean that it's true, right? Like, I'm who I am regardless. I do the therapy I do regardless, but the perception and people's perceptions tend to be their reality.
Well, I think also a part of this is, I found this true is when I invest more into something, right? There's a bigger buy-in and I'm like
And
more committed and
yeah,
more
and
willing
they
to
do
do that
studies
side.
on that as well. Yeah. If people, even $1, right? If you're working in like a community mental health clinic, they found that if they didn't charge anything, they had a tremendous no-show rate because there was no investment, there was no incentive. Like, who cares, right? even charging them $1, $5 a session dramatically decreased the no-show rate because people felt like, well, I spent money on this, so now it has value to me.
Oh, interesting. I've got two final questions for you. The
Yep.
first one is super quick, and then the second one we can wrap up with. But how does payment work for these clinicians? So does the clinician take payment, or is it done through like a centralized system?
So I use a electronic health record system, Simple Practice. There are a lot out there, but Simple Practice is one of the bigger ones.
So they
more
just have
used
their
ones.
credit card on file and they just charge after the
Mhm.
session? Is that okay?
Yep. I mean, if someone wants to pay cash, cool, check, great. Credit card, doesn't matter. Again, whatever's convenient for them. And putting people before profit, yes, taking credit cards means I get hit with a 3% fee. No, I don't charge, and I hate when people charge a fee to use a credit card. Just change the price of your session then. Like, don't say that there's a fee to use a payment method. But yeah, in the beginning, all the therapists build their own clients, right? And then it was super easy. They just go into the system, hit bill, the credit card was on file, whatever. Now that I have a practice coordinator and all of that, she handles all of the billing. But yeah, it's largely keep a credit card on file, bill them during their session, and that's it.
Awesome. Final question I have for you, Adam. I feel like in a very weird, I don't know, weird's the only word I can think of with this economy, right? It's both like inflation and there's presidential election, there's rising housing costs, there's more debt. I read some article about like credit card debt is like
The highest it's ever been.
ever, right? And
Yeah.
in markets like this, how do you keep a private pay practice full?
Difficultly. But you have to spend money on advertising, but it also comes down to where you live. When the pandemic happened and layoffs were wild, I live in an area where, by and large, the population are not the ones at risk of losing their jobs. That is not universally true, of course, but the people that can afford private pay are typically the ones that have higher paying jobs, are in higher level positions, and don't tend to struggle financially in the same way.
Yeah. Interesting. And have you noticed any changes at all? Like, is it kind of like stabilized, or has there been ebbs and flows in the midst of these like past couple of years?
No, it's been fairly steady. I mean, we just had our busiest summer we've ever had, where we didn't see a dip in what is historically a slow season for therapy, right? Summertime, which is amazing that we didn't see a decline in referrals or calls and new patients and things like that. So when I started, there was definitely a decline during, like, it was seasonal. But as the practice is more established and we become more of a known name throughout the community, it levels out.
Adam, so appreciate you. I'm grateful for our friendship.
Likewise.
And where can we learn more about you, about Ally, and the work that you're doing in the world?
Yeah, so the website is allypsych.com, ALLYPSYCH.com. That's all the information about the actual therapy, but I'm super active on TikTok, Instagram, and the handle is the same. It's allypsychpa for each of those. So give us a follow, reach out through the website. We'd love to chat.
Adam, thank you again, and have a great rest of your day.
You too.
Hey there, I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Adam, and especially if you are in a season where you're really thinking long and hard about whether you want to go into group practice, or if you're a group practice owner and you're like, hey, I really think we want to go the private pay route, and what does that look like? Or you are a solo practitioner that wants to say a solo practitioner, I feel like even this conversation just can be so helpful in terms of how, especially if you're seeing clients in the office, things like how does your decor look? What is the ambience that you're communicating? All of that, I think. I hope that all of that's just been incredibly helpful for you. My mind is like spinning in all sorts of different ways from this session. But the one thing that I took away is, and I'll just be like brutally honest, when I think about like charging, one of the things that I often think about is, will people actually pay for this, right? And then there's a extension of that is, am I reputable enough, or am I competent enough to be able to charge this amount? And just hearing and having this conversation with Adam was humbling and also enlightening. It made me realize that there is a segment of the population that is actually naturally skeptical when you undercharge. Like what's the, is this like a bait and switch kind of thing? And then also there is this connection between charging and level of like education and level of like experience, right? Whether it's like we want to admit it or not, I think that is kind of the reality. So I hope that today's conversation has just been incredibly helpful for you. Again, connect with Adam over at allypsych.com. And I hope that you enjoyed today's session. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll catch up soon. Bye.